It's always a pleasure to speak before the committed and the progressive and the radical and the revolutionary. When I was asked to do this, my immediate response was, I've spent too much time talking about the free speech movement in some ways because for many years at the university, I was part of a series of committees that sought to figure out how the university would deal with it. And if you know anything about the university, it's fundamentally a very conservative and in some ways reactionary institution. And so you're always fighting these uphill battles. But I think one of the things that came out of those kinds of struggles was that I got to know a lot of the activists in a deep and personal way, and my admiration for them has only increased over time. And I've been engaged in a variety of projects to try to help make historical sense of the movement. The piece that was referred to that I wrote over 20 years ago grows out of the kind of work that I do. I really do civil rights, Black Power history. That's how that book about the party, Black Panther Party, came to be. And so I was really interested in the fact that a large proportion of the activists who become involved in the free speech movement at Berkeley in the fall of 1964, a month or so earlier, had been involved in the Mississippi Summer Project, including Mario Savio. So I did a lot of researching and thinking about that. And the big picture argument that I wanted to make was the transformative impact of the civil rights movement and the ways in which the civil rights movement catalyzed and galvanized global social protest, and especially domestic social protest, and thinking about the civil rights movement not as I have a dream, but, which I get sick of sometimes. I really do. I mean, it's like these students, do you know anything else? It's literally, I don't know if there are any students, but I mean, it's such a small part of what the movement was about. And I think that whole issue of the world historical impact of Black freedom struggle, the world historical impact of the civil rights movement, and then you bring it down to sort of thinking about the particulars, especially in a more granular way, and thinking about how Berkeley was transformed by those who were inspired by the youth activism of those involved in the civil rights movement. That's another aspect that I like to encourage my students to think about. These were people like you who chose to make a difference, and you can make a difference. The other piece of this that I emphasize was thinking about sort of how the local civil rights movement in the Bay Area was a powerful and necessary aspect of the struggle. It's not as well known as sort of that Southern civil rights movement that galvanizes sort of the media, or that the media is truly engaged in. But I think there's a whole series of civil rights activism, and I think it was covered here. And then there's a whole left, what I would call left progressive student activism. It didn't die in the 50s, but and then it wobbles on, and then in the late 50s, early 60s, I think it grows with a whole series of organizations like Slate, There are several committees founded on campus. There's Friends of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So there's all kind of local civil rights activism. But I do think that summer in Mississippi had a profound impact on people like Mario, and Mario talked about it and talked about not only sort of his interactions on the ground with grassroots black insurgents, but sort of the kind of leadership that was involved. So I want to just make sure that we pay some attention not only to sort of that Southern movement, but sort of the local civil rights movement, thinking about sort of the civil rights movement. I like to think about it as a series of insurgencies that spark in different places. But if you go to almost any sizable community in the South, there's a movement. I'm from a place called Greensboro, North Carolina, and in February 1st, 1960, I'm all of 9 years old, and these 4 black college students sit in at the place not that far from where I go to church. And Greensboro has never been the same, and it was really funny to me, was one of those guys, I was in his father's industrial arts class, and what do we learn in industrial arts? Join the NAACP. It was mostly a youth chapter of the NAACP. It was mostly politics. You made trades, and then you got politics. Centrist sort of NAACP type politics, but at least politics. And so, I came out of that. And so thinking about the role of youth and centering youth in social struggle and in social movements is very, very important. The other piece of this is that each generation must make its own history. And at this point in my journey, I really like to honor those who lead principled lives of activism and honor students especially who choose that path. The other piece of that essay that I just want to say a little bit about was Mario was a lifetime activist. And if you went to that program, when was it? The other night I was there. And it was several of the free speech movement veterans. It was really one of the beautiful parts to me was thinking about how over the course of their lives, that episode has inspired and energized sort of a life of commitment to all kinds of progressive struggles. The final thing that I just want to think with you about and just sort of, hopefully we can talk about, is thinking about sort of the global, because the other piece of the civil rights movement and Black Power movement was sort of trying to connect up not only with other sort of social justice movements in this country, especially poor people's movements, the movements of other people of color, especially indigenous people and the like. So trying to figure out how do we push forward these struggles individually and collectively, what we do. And that's one of the things that I really, that led me to do the work that I did on the party. That was always an aspect of the party's politics that I found very, very attractive. But thinking about over the course of the late 20th century and part of the 21st century, the anti-apartheid struggle, Occupy, George Floyd, wherever you go, Black Lives Matter, how and why Black freedom struggle not only catalyzes Black communities, but catalyzes left, progressive, radical, revolutionary communities, and how and why we think about that, how we think about that, what we make of that. And it seems to me that coming out of the free speech movement, one of the things that I really found very, very important was that it really set virtually everyone that I know associated with that movement on a path. And it was a life path. And so they became what I would call long-distance freedom fighters. You know, not just in it for the Pyrrhic victory or this or that. And so what I hope we can do at the end is sort of talk about some of this. And I'm very, very open, but thank you very much.